Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to New Administration in the Financial Markets, How Political Shifts Could Trigger Black Swans, featuring John Horn, who's a professor of practice in economics here at WashU in the Olin Business School. My name is Evan Kyle, and I work with the WashU Alumni Networks team as part of University Advancement. As part of my role, I help steward the WashU Finance Network in New York, along with incredible WashU alumni volunteers who serve on the Finance Network Executive Committee. I'd specifically like to thank Greg Walker, Maury Davis, and Ashley Becker for bringing the idea of this event to life and for serving as leaders for the Finance Network. I'd also like to say thank you to John for being here and offering his expertise and thoughts for the network's benefit. As a note, this event is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the event. In addition, the views and opinions expressed by our panelists and participants are their own and do not necessarily reflect the policies or positions of WashU. As you know, our conversation will focus on the political shifts that and how those will impact the financial markets this coming year, especially as it relates to the potential for Black Swan events. John, Ashley, and others will provide some of their thoughts, and that will help get the discussion started. We will take questions from the audience using the Q&A feature and the raise hand feature. When folks are able to raise their hand, we will unmute participants for them to be able to ask their questions directly to our speakers. But we will also be monitoring the Q&A section for those who prefer to type their questions. In addition, for those who are in New York, I wanted to give a special shout out for an upcoming event, the New York Holiday Party, which will be held on December 18th at Brooklyn Winery from 6 to 9 p.m. The registration link will be available in the chat soon, and we hope to be able to see you there. So now I'm going to pass things off to Ashley Becker, one of our WashU Finance Network alumni leaders. Take it away, Ashley.
Evan. Happy Tuesday. So as you may have noticed, we've been trying to do a different event every month. Given the shift in the market the day after the election, we thought it was very relevant, to bring Professor John Horn into our community to learn and build off that momentum. We are excited to also have an in-person event after the 100 days of the administration next year. So John will be physically coming to New York. So I invite you to use, there's the Q&A button. The chat's disabled, but you can use the Q&A button to put any questions that come to mind live throughout, because we want to take that as input to our in-person meeting, and we want to make sure that it is relevant to you. Greg and Maury, we all came together and said, let's do this. Let's bring in John. Let's do it now because things are changing. But we are excited to continue the conversation next year as well. It is my pleasure to introduce John Horn. He's a professor of practice in economics at the Olin Business School at Washington University in St. Louis. His micro, macro, and global economic courses are informed by his 9 years as a senior expert in the strategy practice of McKinsey, serving clients on competitive strategy, wargaming, workshops, and corporate strategy. He is the author of Inside the Competitor's Mindset, How to Predict Their Next Move and Position Yourself for Success, which won an Axiom Business Book Golden Medal Award. In addition to his book, John has also published numerous articles about applying behavioral economics and competitive insight in business strategy. He holds a bachelor degree in economics from the University of Michigan and a PhD from Harvard. What I'm most excited about, John, that we've talked about a lot, is your experience wargaming, not only in the economic, but in the policy space as we see that converge. And there's probably a lot of exciting things that are about to happen next year. So I turn it over to you, John.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you everyone for inviting me to be here today. I think I'm just going to start with a few thoughts, hopefully to spur the discussion and conversation. As I think about what's going to happen with the next 4 years, with the election result that happened barely a little over a month ago now, is that it's raising the possibility, as I see it, of what I, called the session, which is Black Swans. And I didn't use that lightly. the reason why I think that there's more likelihood of black swans coming up in the next 4 years is because however you want to define what a black swan is, essentially it's something that was not predicted or you did not foresee it coming, but it has a big major effect on how the world works and how you view the world. And I think if you look at what's happened with even the last month since the election happened, there's been a lot of activity from the incoming administration on what they're planning to do, who they're planning to lead, how they're planning to lead. And some of it is what was talked about in the election in the last 2 years. Some of it is new. Some of it is different interpretations. And I think the one thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't feel like it's just business as usual. This isn't just we're going to have a debate about whether taxes should go from 17.5% to 16%. We're not going to have should we have, another category of goods which are going to be tariffed from China. There's some big fundamental differences which might be enacted in terms of how our government and we as a society and how we interact with other countries. And it's that possibility. I'm not saying it's a certainty, but the possibility that there could be some big fundamental shifts in how the economy works, how our government works, how international relations work, could have material impacts on the financial markets and investments. And it's not that we have to predict them, but we have to be open to them as possibilities and be aware of what the signals might be telling us that it might be coming true, or it looks like there's a bird flying towards us and it looks like, it's got black wings. So maybe we should beware that we might have a black swan coming. It's about shifting your mindset to be aware of it's not just business as usual. There might be some big fundamental changes coming. Let me pause there and see.
Does anyone have any questions? And if you raise your hand, we can unmute you.
Actually, while we're waiting for everyone to kind of collect their thoughts on the topic here, I have a question for John. Let's just start with sort of a very clear outlier: foreign relations and cross-border opportunities in finance. What do you see as some of the leading indicators that this is going to be, a very different situation from business as usual, as you stated? Is there any clear examples where more likely than not, we're going to see some dramatic changes in the way that the markets are performing because of the US's role abroad?
I think it's a great example of we don't know, but I could paint the picture, a couple different pictures, and it's not like 1,000 different pictures. One state of the world could be Trump says, I'm going to impose huge tariffs on China, big tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And we saw after he said, oh yeah, I'm going to impose tariffs on everything from Canada and Mexico. And within a couple of days, the heads of those countries said, wait, don't do that. And then they went to Mar-a-Lago to talk with them. And now that talk has sort of settled down, but Trump hasn't said, it's all good, we're not going to do that. If he goes ahead and says, I'm still imposing those tariffs anyway, that will be massive disruption to all kinds of industries. If he goes ahead and imposes the tariffs on China, it's going to have major disruption to industries that trade with China and just the economy in the United States. On the other hand, I could paint a picture where he comes in and says, look, I'm going to do this unless you do X, Y, and Z. And because of the potential for the major disruption, other countries say, okay, we'll do X, Y, and maybe a little bit of Z. Is that good enough? And he says, yep, good enough. We're done. In which case it is sort of business as usual because nothing does change. I honestly, I wouldn't bet on either one as the right answer, but either one is a story which to me at least is viable. And there's huge difference in what that means for where trade is going to happen, if trade is going to happen, what's going to happen to US, the growth of the US economy, consumers, inflation, et cetera. it could be just, it's not a bluff, but a initial negotiating ploy to get what he wants. And then he will claim, I mean, we saw this a little bit with the previous administration, said, I'm going to impose all these tariffs on China to fix the trade deficit with China. And China said, okay, we'll change, we'll stop, sending you as much stuff, and we'll buy more stuff from you, we promise. And he said, okay, great, and imposed a few tariffs, but it wasn't the full level of what he had planned. And we still have a trade deficit with China, but it was asserted that the problem was fixed. Is that going to happen again? Again, maybe. And if that is, then yeah, like investments will keep flowing, sort of same kinds of investments, same ways of analyzing it, use the same models, et cetera. But if he says, look at last time, no, I'm going to actually impose it until it actually gets to zero. Trade deficit is zero, and then I'll pull the tariffs off. And in that case, major disruption. So is it going to happen again? I'm not sure, but some of the people he's put into or nominated for a Treasury Department and Commerce Department don't seem to want that. But some of the people he's put into place who are his trade advisors absolutely seem to want that. And what does that mean? Who's going to get his ear? Who's going to be the final one to convince him? Who's going to step out of the room and someone else is in the room that says, no, do it or don't do it, and that's the last choice? We don't know. And because of that, that's the major uncertainty, which could lead to much different outcomes in terms of what we see happen.
And I find this. Oh, go ahead. Let me just make a quick point now. Open up. I'm just want to point out that we're seeing some pretty dramatic behavior within the corporate community thus far. Inventory numbers have risen significantly as a result of this uncertainty on the cost of inputs into businesses from abroad. We've seen some changes, believe it or not, in employment numbers in anticipation for overhead shifts that are going to be happening. And it seems all very precautionary at this point because there's so much uncertainty within the marketplace. And we're seeing that just sort of translate into reality as we speak. That's all I want to say. Yeah.
If I could pick up on the
about Pennsylvania, because I feel a lot of attention's been put on Pennsylvania, U.S. Steel. I have a lot of friends who have been working the deal for Japan to buy it, but he talked a lot about it in his speeches, keep it U.S. Steel. I feel Japan's a friendly country. We have a lot of troops deployed out there. How do you see that playing out? And if the U.S. was to have it, like, do you think there's enough private money, or would it have to be subsidized by the government? Like, what are your thoughts on potential scenarios for U.S. Steel?
I could see a situation where he says it has to stay in U.S. hands. We have to manufacture it. We will subsidize it. I could see him saying it has to stay in U.S. hands, so someone step up and buy it, but we're not going to pay for it because the government shouldn't pay for it. I could see him saying, hey, Japan, spend another X number of $1 billion a year and we'll let you buy U.S. Steel. And that's good enough. I think what's makes it to me sort of so uncertain is it's not the same sort of international relationship negotiating points. It's not clear to me what exactly is going to be the driver of the objective. And I think, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it feels to me from looking at the first administration is it wasn't always, people ask me, well, can you predict what Trump's going to do? And what I say is the only thing I consistently can see in his actions is whatever is good for Trump at the time is what Trump will do. And it could be at the time that he says, no, I've got to prove to China that we're strong, and so we're going to tell Japan no. Or he's going to say, I want to show the rest of the world that I can force Japan to give us what we want in exchange for them buying it. Or it's not clear. And again, because he likes to have, or at least the reporting indicates that he likes to have chaos around him, some of the reports about why Matt Gaetz was the attorney general nominee is that the discussion was going on and someone left the room and someone else spoke up and said, make it Gaetz. And he's like, okay. And that sort of off the cuff sort of decision-making is hard when you're trying to predict long-term a 20, 30-year investment in a steel factory or a steel company. And that's, to me, what makes it so challenging is it's not just oh, let's run the numbers, let's do the discounted cash flow, let's do it has to be this, this, this. We don't know. So I could tell, like, again, 3 or 4 stories for how I think that's going to play out. I can tell you the one I think would probably be best for the U.S. economy, but again, that may not be the driving objective at the time.
So we'll see after the 100 days.
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Rich McDonald, I think you have your hand raised. If you want to go ahead, you can unmute.
Hi, Ashley. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hey, John. Good to see you again.
Hey, Rich.
My question really revolves around not really the tariffs and, the trade issue, but around the potential impact of the reorganization of the governmental departments.
Mhm.
And don't you think that that is even more disruptive, if you would, right? And potentially more chaotic than tariffs and the trade issue.
I agree. It can be, it could be as or more disruptive. And again, what we don't know right now is he going to let Elon and Vivek go off and sort of take 2 years to come up with new plans and ideas, and then at that point he'll just assert that, well, the economy is doing better, so we don't need to, we fixed it? Or will there be people in the different departments who voluntarily retire because they don't want to get caught up in that, and he'll say, see, the deep state left on its own, it's done? Or will there be a broad scale evisceration of some of the departments, if not getting rid of the departments? And because there's such a small majority in both houses of Congress, will there be enough Republicans in swing states or swing districts to say, yeah, I'm willing to put people out of jobs for the next 2 years, and I will be able to make it last, or make an explanation for the next 2 years? There's been so much which has been written that if you look at the budget of the United States, and you take out Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and you take out interest on the debt, and you take out defense spending, there's not $2 trillion a year to cut. And so this, goal of the Department of Governmental Efficiency to cut $2 trillion of spending, you're going to cut something that Trump has already said he's not going to cut, or it's going to have massive disruption across all phases of the government. And is that going to make the government more efficient? Maybe. It's hard to see how. I read one stat that the number of federal employees in the U.S. government today is essentially the same as it was during the Reagan administration. So the idea that the economy's grown, over the last 30 years, but the number of federal employees has stayed the same, kind of indicates that maybe we don't have a ton of stuff to cut to make it more efficient without creating massive disruption. And so I think you're right, Rich, is that where the tea leaves have to be read is, where will those cuts happen? Because that will affect different industries differentially, and that's the challenge.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If I could also pick up on this theme of the big pronouncements that came up during the campaign. Mari hit on the tariffs. We just talked about the massive DOGE effort. Let me ask about the mass deportation. If you could give a perspective on the likelihood, because I think it reminds me a little bit of what you just said. There aren't really people to cut in the government. It seems very difficult to deport 1 million people a year, or 1 million people total. But certainly 1 million people a year seems daunting. But then if you could war game out, what happens if it does happen, if we do have 1 million people deported in 2025, and then again in 2026 and the years thereafter?
Yeah, you could see a situation where if we see execution of that plan, meaning camps being built, people being put on trains, people being put on boats, and actually sent, that it could lead to an exodus of people saying, I don't want to wait for that to happen. I'm just going to go myself. And the question then becomes, do these people really have an opportunity to go back to the, a country or the country they originally came from, or will they just try to stay and make it work in the United States? And then the question is, okay, if we actually do, take 4 million people or more out of the US, what is that going to do to the labor supply? And the simple answer is, well, they're workers who can replace them. But if you look at labor force participation in the US, it's been steadily declining. The baby boomers are going to increase in their retirement. And it's not clear that, there will be a large pool of people who will replace those workers if they're sent back or sent out of the country. And so is it going to have a negative effect on the economy? Almost certainly, at least in the short term, unless there's a way of figuring out how to operationalize around that. It can't not have a disruptive effect. I mean, the fact that there are that many undocumented people in the United States, and it has not created such a large, for the most part, the people of working age of that group are working. And the fact that they're working means that there are jobs they can take. And you would have to believe that they have taken jobs that there are, say 5 other million people who are just waiting to get those jobs, but they can't because the undocumented people who are here are willing to take a lower wage. And all we need to do is push them out of the United States and suddenly, we'll have the jobs here. Again, doesn't seem realistic. And if you do believe that, then wages are going to go up, which means prices are going to go up, which means inflation is going to go up. So is it going to happen? Again, I could tell a story where there's a smaller number of people, those with criminal records or those who came in the last 4 years, and just blame it on the Biden administration and whatever, and say, see, I fixed the problem. And if that's going to be good enough, to say that I've done what I said I was going to do, or I did what I said I was going to do enough to solve what I said the problem was, and there's no more problem anymore. I think one of the challenges with trying to predict this is if I had told you 4 years ago that the incumbent party would have 2%, 2.5%, low 2 inflation, high 3-4% unemployment, economy growing at about 2.5% every quarter, you'd say, wow, like that's gonna be hard to beat. And yet the key thing that everyone points to for why Trump won was the economy. And by all metrics of the economy, it was doing really well. And not for everyone, not evenly distributed, but overall for the general metrics. And it raises the question of, at some point, do those metrics start to look good for Trump? And he says, see, I fixed it and we're done. And these things don't happen. Again, it could be nope, I'm going to prove I can kick all these people out and does it, or nope, I kicked enough people out, I fixed the problem and we're done.
If I can ask a related item, you saw recent articles related to the Kristen Welker interview that the president-elect did, where he said he believes he can eliminate birthright citizenship via executive order. And it sort of resurfaced something that he said when he ran the first time, but kind of was dismissed as unconstitutional, impossible. And I have noticed that the way it's written about this second time is there's definitely some articles that say it's impossible, it's crazy, it can't happen, but there's quite a few articles that take a different approach, saying actually the more you think about it, the more it could happen. You just need the Supreme Court to reverse 130 years of precedent. But you have a Supreme Court that has signaled it's very happy to reverse 130 years of precedent, and there's sort of a growing movement to reverse the precedent of the 130 years ago. So I'd be curious your point of view about likelihood, as well as what impact it has, because maybe it's a lot less than the deportations, but in my mind, maybe it's a lot more, because it maybe reaches into families where every member of the family thought they were citizens, and now suddenly they're not, or if it would only be going forward that no new people could become citizens. I'd just be curious your point of view.
Yes. I mean, I also heard, I think it was in the same interview or around the same time, he's also said, I'd love to see a legislative solution to the the DACA problem. Like, the Dreamers. It's like, I, so I, the reason why I keep saying I can't predict it is because they're conflicting messages. And that's the hard thing, is it doesn't feel like there's a consistent message. I'm not a lawyer, so this is just playing, a lawyer on TV kind of interpretation, but I could see a situation potentially where the Supreme Court, in an originalist sort of view, said, well, the original meaning of that amendment was to protect the people who had been born when they were enslaved. And so if you were born as a slave in the United States in the last 130 years, then yes, you are a citizen. But anyone who was not enslaved when they were born here, nope, that doesn't count, because that was the original intent of the people who framed that amendment when they wrote that. Is that something, if I read it, I was like, there's no way they would, I could say, yeah, that seems to be sort of, again, as a non-lawyer, that seems sort of along the lines of how some recent decisions have gone. What would that mean? Again, it's, how would that be interpreted as from this point forward, or all the way back to anyone, someone who's 45 who was born here suddenly now is not a citizen anymore. And the disruption that would cause would be more than all the individuals that we know are undocumented. And I think the other thing it would do, which would be, I think more sociological to the economy, is the sort of the interactions and the trust that happens between people would be much harder. I mean, we're already in a polarized situation, that it would just create even more polarization, which, ultimately, when you think about an economy is people having to want to come together to trust each other, to interact and trade and transact. And anything that's going to create more polarization, to me, feels like it's going to make the economy even harder to work well.
I'll do one last on.
Hold on. I just want to see, Greg, if anyone in the audience, because I know some people joined a little late. So there is the raise a hand. We're just having a conversation. So this is here for you. So you just hit the hand raise button. I'm just going to give them a few moments to see if anyone, because I know silence makes people uncomfortable. So usually someone asks a question. So we'll give John a moment to catch his breath, and I'd love to hear from someone. We're also looking to do an in-person event next year, probably after the 100 days. So if there's a certain topic that you're interested in or want us to talk about more, then that'd be great to learn too. Maybe Maury and Greg, I should start calling on names.
Cold calling.
Yeah.
Like we're back at WashU.
Peter Hook, Spencer, Monica, do you guys have any questions? Steve? Because Greg, Maury, and I could talk all day, but we'd like to hear from you guys. Andy, Andrea. Do you guys like this? Is this helpful? Okay, Spencer, do you want to read your question? Or do you want me to, can we get Spencer unmuted? Are you able to, do you want to say what you submitted? Spencer, are you there? Okay, so Spencer says, hi, John. Do you have any idea how Trump's proposed policies may impact professional services hiring moving forward? So I would imagine what consulting, the services space, because we definitely saw that contract right in the past 8 to 12 months. So do you see that shifting, or maybe even in certain areas?
I think this sort of gets back to the question about what's going to happen with Rich's question about the downsizing of the government, that there have been, reports that a lot of lawyers from the Department of Justice, career civil attorneys, have started to reach out and say, is there a place for me at your firm in private practice? And, in tight hiring environments for professional services, most most employees of the government are, not manual labor, they're professional service workers. And if they leave preemptively, or if there's a downsizing of the government, that's going to create a lot of unemployed professional service people that will start to look for jobs in places like consulting, or accounting, or finance, or, you name it. And I think that's just going to make it even more challenging to find opportunities and jobs for those industries. And it will, make it harder for wages and hiring new workers in that area. So I think it will probably be challenging.
So I think I'm making people uncomfortable because now I got anonymous questions. So John, we got a question about how are we getting any sense of how CEOs are feeling in the lead up to the new administration? The market seems to be relatively unperturbed.
Yeah, I think so it's hard to say because most CEOs don't want to go on the record. My sense, my reading of the tea leaves is that most CEOs feel like they're going to be able to manage their industry, their situation, as long as they can, take the right number of trips to Mar-a-Lago, or they can, sidle up to the right people, whoever those people are, and, play nice, that they will get what they want. And that it's okay as long as we don't get crushed. One of the things that was pointed out was when Trump did put the tariffs on China 4+ years ago, a lot of companies came and said, hey, this is going to be bad for us. Can we get an exemption? And as long as they had been friendly to the administration, for the most part, yes. And so I think right now, my sense is, because we haven't seen these policies actually implemented, I think a lot of CEOs are sort of trusting that it's going to be exactly the same as it was 2017 to 2020. That, look, as long as you go and you say all the nice things and say all the right things to the right people, you'll get an exemption. It'll be business as usual. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But I think where I, want to try to at least plant the seed in people's minds is that, yeah, there's a good chance that that will be what happens, but there's also a good chance that this time the answer is no. That it's not going to be as simple as just going and saying, hey, look, this is bad for us, can we get an exemption? I mean, the other question we don't know this time is how China is going to respond. China has been a little more aggressive in saying, we're going to stop shipments of goods and services ourselves. So if you put tariffs on us, it's not just us putting tariffs. We're going to stop shipping you. I think I read that they're going to stop shipments of rare earth metals, drone parts. They're not shipping to U.S. manufacturers. And, if you're a CEO, you can go to the Trump administration all you want and say, hey, can you ask them to send us the drone parts? China will say, no, you don't get them. That's different than just saying, can you have the tariffs waived for us and can we keep importing them? I think that's one of the things which is a wild card is how is China going to look at this? And will they, they're going to have a role to play in this. And it may not be as easy, quote unquote, as it was in the previous administration.
So to pull that thread, and I don't know if it's an indirect, I mean, RFK has been pretty vocal of what he intends to do. But I find it interesting about, the unfortunate incident with the United Health Group CEO. And I've seen the impact of CEOs in that space, like they're taking their C-suites off the website. They're even changing some of their policies. I don't know if, who is being picked for these different cabinet, and appointee seats is impacting that. But, anything you want to comment on that space, because that's definitely having some changes.
Yeah, I think to me, the question, and this, I saw someone else, Hamza asked the question about the populist wing clashing with the pro-business wing. I think to me, that's one of the uncertainties with healthcare, is that the pro-business side would say, yes, we can say vaccines aren't covered, and yes, I mean, in some sense, I don't think the insurance companies would be that opposed to rolling back some of the, not getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but if Kennedy says we're not going to cover vaccines, or you don't have to do these things anymore, that feels from a business perspective that the insurance companies would be okay. But I think where it's not clear is, a lot of what happened after, the assassination last week was there seems to be a lot of anger at the healthcare industry. And is the populist wing going to have a voice which says, no, like all of it has to change? And that's why, it's not just vaccines, it's not just raw milk, it's like change the whole thing. And so at some level you could say, well, that's too big of a ship to turn that quickly. But on the other hand, I mean, Trump said during the debate, and then said even again during the interview last week that, as soon as we find something better, we'll do it. Well, yeah, but what does better mean? And that's the thing. I don't think we can predict what better means. I think it is going to be challenging to see, someone else asked about cuts to Medicare or Medicaid. I could easily see that there's a shift in how Medicaid is compensated to the states and what states have to do. That could reduce Medicaid coverage. But that also seems like that's going to affect lower income people a lot. And that, there's so many sort of conflicting interests, and it's not clear which interest is going to win at any one time. So healthcare, I think what happened last week sort of exposed more broadly what a lot of people sort of knew but didn't want to say, which is that people are not happy with the healthcare system. But what does that mean it's going to look like?
I worked for one, and it reminded me a lot of working for the federal government. So
yeah.
I do want to thanks Peter Hook. Peter Hook wrote this is great. So he's enjoying this. So thanks so much. We have another anonymous question. What are the chances that Social Security and Medicare will be cut, and what would that look like? Building off what you just asked. And what's the appetite for simply raising the taxable income level? Two different questions. You can pick, John, whichever one you want.
Yeah. I think because of the fact that there's such a slim majority in the House and the Senate, that it'd be surprising to see any kind of compromise on Medicare or Social Security eligibility. Math says that's one of the things which would be helpful to try to at least shift where the deficit and the debt is going. But I can't. It sounds easy to say. I can't see that happening without the Democrats agreeing to getting something in return. But on the other hand, if there's enough of a, no, this has to happen. On the other hand, Trump was very, very consistent saying, I will not touch that. And it's not clear to me that he has any appetite for it. Again, looking at his constituency and sort of, the demographics of who supports him, I would be shocked. But again, I also wouldn't be shocked if that was sort of seen as a big thing that could be cut. I think taxes, the second part, raising taxable income levels. I think if you mean like the brackets of different income levels.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean,
well, I think that question means, how Medicare you pay to infinity, but Social Security has a cap.
Yeah, no, I that's raising taxes. There's no way the Republicans will go for that. That I would be shocked if that happened.
So John, I
Um,
think you've rightly pointed out like contradictions, which is interesting because I feel in the financial services world, it could be just considered diversification, right? You never put all your money in one space, you always spread it out. And there
Yep.
you might even give money to things that oppose each other, maybe even indirectly. So building off of that, there's a question around how will Elon Musk's role in the Trump administration impact US-China negotiations, like you were talking about before. Given his large investment in China, he makes money off of China. The Commerce Secretary is going to he makes money off of China. So
Trump makes money
how
off
do
of China.
you,
So
yeah,
you know,
Trump
it's
makes money
like,
off of China. So how does that, what are your thoughts on, and this might be a really interesting thing to talk about after the 100 days, like those potential contradictions, which ones, had the lever get pulled and which way did the seesaw go? So I think that might be a great topic, but do you want to comment at that at all? I know you've talked about it a little bit this evening.
yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer is I would not be shocked if all of Musk's businesses get exemptions from tariffs, either for imports, imported parts, or in exchange for preferential treatment. On the other hand, if you think about the businesses he's in, I mean, for the most part, solar panels, they're not made in the US. Electric vehicles, China's already overtaken the US in producing electric vehicles. Tesla's not the leader in electric vehicles in China. They're competing, but China's pushing their own companies. They're not, they don't need Elon. They don't want Elon. They want their own to succeed. And I again, does Elon think, look, if we hammer China, that's going to make China weaker in the rest of the world, and I can sell more Teslas in the rest of the world because China's not going to be, the growth market I thought it was going to be? Maybe. Is he going to get idealistic and say, no, we have to do this for the best, betterment of the United States, because I'll still get subsidies from the government to sort of prop up my businesses? Maybe. I think we'll start to see, how much of it, who not what is sort of dictating sort of announcements from the administration. I think the other thing is I would not be surprised if within 6 months Elon is no longer welcome at the White House. I mean, we saw this with Steve Bannon. We saw this with so many of the other advisors that were deep friends and supporters of Trump, which were kicked out because they started to get more attention. And Elon loves attention, and I can't imagine that ending. Again, from historical precedent, I can't see Trump liking Elon stealing his spotlight. So there, again, I could tell a situation in the world where in 6 months Elon's persona non grata at the White House in Mar-a-Lago. But I could also tell, where Trump says, look, I don't want to do all this. You take it over. You deal with it. Tell me what to do. Either one could happen.
The Doge is going to be a full-time job, so maybe that's the strategy. Go over there.
Yeah, go do that.
Go be the bad guy and slash different things.
Yeah.
Peter Hook, do you want to join us and unmute? Because we know you're enjoying it and you also have a question, so we'd love to hear from you. Peter, do you want to go ahead and unmute? Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, go ahead.
Hello. Sorry, joining from an office. Question is, any perspective on the outlook for the food and consumer goods industry based on a combination of scary things like RFK's decisions to really push on like corn syrup, for example, and on the other side of tariffs on potential imported ingredients? None of those are kind of a question mark, but given a lot of factors there, would love your perspective on how to think about the future of that industry.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is that to reformulate a lot of those products is not going to be just a 1 month effort. And so for for food consumer packaged goods companies in particular, it's going to have to be a conversation about, do we invest in trying to at least look like we're making the changes to satisfy and shift away from the ingredients that we don't, or that they don't want us to use, while at the same time saying we can't get avocados from Montana. We have to get them from Mexico, or we can't get, we can't grow limes in Alaska. We've got to get them from Mexico. So let us import these. And I could see exemptions for a lot of things. And again, Trump could say, look, well, as long as we can, ship more corn and wheat down to Mexico, they can ship us more avocados. We got what we wanted. Or, he could also claim the reports were that we're going to impose these tariffs on Canada and Mexico unless they solve the immigration problem. Well, if immigration numbers had been coming down, and if they continue to go down, he could say, see, I solved it. And so there are no more tariffs on food imports from Mexico and other things from Mexico. And it could just be selective for certain types of food, certain types of things. I think my sense is for the food industries, again, my sense is that a wholesale restructuring of what you sell and how you sell it is not just we have to take out this food dye. That how you formulate and how you produce a product to be shelf stable, and the packaging and the distribution and what that means at the retailer, and there's so many things which go into that decision. I would be shocked if it was a disrupt everything and try to do things. My sense is it probably will be yes, we'll work on doing that, but it will take time. Is that going to be good enough? Probably not for RFK Jr., but is Trump going to say, look, it's good enough, leave it alone? Or is he going to say, nope, got to change it? I think that gets back to how much is Trump going to let the people around him make decisions, and how much is he ultimately going to say, no, this is good enough? Yeah.
As people think of other questions, I know, John, you and I had talked a little bit about, there's all these things, right? But are there things that you think could be helpful tips for us alumni as, so that as the unexpected occurs, it can set us up for success, like ways of processing information or thinking about it, or thinking about different options or wargaming? Are there any techniques you think could benefit us?
Yeah, I think so. From a financial perspective, to the extent that there are a group of industries or a group of sectors that you focus on as an investor, I would focus on what are the issues that matter to that sector. So don't try to understand all the geopolitical changes that could be happening in the US government. It's way too complicated. But like if you are, if you invest in CPG companies or consumer food companies or agricultural companies, focus on those kinds of decisions and start right now with what are the things which could be uncertain? What are the things which could be major disruptions to the industry? I don't think it would take that long to come up with a list of, if there are changes in HHS from RFK that lead to we can't use this ingredient, or we have to reformulate products, or if there is like for like this, basic materials, steel, etc., what are the which are the countries we have to focus on, which are the changes which would make it different for whether those are good investments or not. So narrow down to the uncertainties. And at this point, I wouldn't say put probabilities on those. We can't put probabilities, but just identify what are the things from talking to others in my network, or talking just from reading about different viewpoints. I think this is one area where getting different viewpoints is really going to be helpful, because someone from a news site or from an industry group, which you may not pay attention to, may say something and you say, yeah, well, I don't think that's going to happen, but let me put on the list just in case, because, again, I think it was said earlier, that the discussion around things like birthright citizenship, the conversation is different today than it was even 2 months ago, is different than it was 4 years ago. And it's about recognizing that I have to pay attention to those things to see, is the conversation changing? Is the discussion changing? How are people sort of talking about it changing? So you're aware of it, not so you can predict it and say, well, there's a 65% chance of it happening or not. That's a fool's errand. You're never going to get there. But with black swans, the reason why they're black swans is you're shocked and surprised. And I guess what I would say is try to at least not overwhelm yourself with 1,000 different things, but narrow it down to like, of all the things we've listed as a group, which could be relevant for our industry or the industries that we invest in, that there are 5 things which really matter. Let's start with those 5 and just sort of keep tracking them for the next couple of weeks and for the first couple of months after the administration. Who was nominated? How much have they changed their department? How much has been written about them? Are they saying things which sort of are in line with what we expect them to say? Are they business as usual statements, or are they fundamentally different? Being aware and I guess tracking those things is going to give you better insight into A, it might be changing, and B, what direction might it be changing, than just to wait and see and hope that things will be the same as they were before.
Yeah, I think that's great, John. And we've had a lot of questions about people that clearly have clients, right? Be it investors or industries. I've found in my experience, I'm a crisis professional, that
Mhm.
if you share these wild ideas, even as a joke, like, wouldn't it be crazy if X happened? Then if something close to X happens, they've at least conditioned their brain a little bit that something like that could happen. So you don't have to go all in on it, but you may want to think about those what you may think is a wild idea, to just start to socialize, have those conversations, or even ask the questions, hey, if something really drastic happens, do you have a mechanism, to approach that? Back to that professional services question, I think that's where there's going to be a lot of work, because I think there's going to be, policies that come out with short time frames that are going to disrupt something. So, how are you helping people be ready for that? And the more you can start to think that way, then it's not a shock. It's less of a shock to you. So at least you can help, your client, your investor through that. And use the alumni network. I'm sure there's people
Yeah.
do different things. To your point, John, get different ideas, be it professors like John or friends that you have in the area. So we'll definitely create some more events next year, to be able to create space for that.
I mean, you and I actually talked about this in the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago about, crypto, and what is that going to, right now the market's going through the roof. But
Yeah.
logistically, if crypto was sort of the way in which the government, or it became a more standardized payment mechanism, the value, there's so many things that would have to happen for that to be implemented, and it would be so disruptive that I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying it would change drastically or when it would happen, but if all you're looking at it now is as an investment, it's going to go up, great. But if you're doing that because you think it's going to be something like the default currency of the United States, to get to that point, it's going to massively change what the value of those Bitcoins are. Even if it's Bitcoin, it could be something different. And if Ethereum becomes the coin, or Doge becomes the coin, your Bitcoins now really aren't worth that much. And it's not that I'm saying, stop investing in Bitcoin, but at some point you have to start thinking about, wait, what if some of these things do happen? What if they do start to say, no, we're going to actually start using this as tradable currency instead of, pay your taxes with Bitcoin? What does that mean for this thing that I now own? And what does that mean for the environment around that? I think that's where, to me, someone had just asked a question about positive black swan events. There could be positive black swan events. I mean, I think that's what's so, I don't want to say scary, but so uncertain is, there's a familiarity to how the US government operates and how things progress. And there could be some unknowns that would make things so much better that we just don't know about. And maybe those will happen. We don't know. I think if anything, what I would say is the one thing I think is going to happen in the next 4 years, and I would like to encourage people to at least be aware of in a mindset, is that it's not going to be business as usual, whether for good or for bad, for fantastic or for disastrous or whatever it is. It's very unlikely just to be the same thing over and over and over that we've experienced for the last 50 years, if not longer.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to, as we think about closing out here, is those positive opportunities. And to your point, John, there's going to be the things that happen, but in an environment of change, are there changes that could actually benefit you, your industry, your clients? Because, it's like January when everyone starts going to the gym, it's like chaotic and it's really easy to go there and try a different machine or do, because everyone is and no one knows what they're doing,
Yeah.
So is this a time that you could think about things that you would like to change, that you haven't been able to, or it's been stuck in the system or the bureaucracy? We know those big banks, right? We love them, but they can sometimes move like the government can. So, is there something disruptive there that could happen? Like Fidelity is thinking of, they've been trying to trade on crypto. So what would that look like? But
And I think to your point, it's where the opportunity for diversification feels like it's something worth looking into even more. That, diversification sounds great and diversification is an easy answer, but then you're going to have a lot of diversification investments which fail. And in hindsight, it's like, I don't want to be the one who pointed to that as the investment to make. Now might be a better time to start saying, yeah, we really do need to diversify and look at it, because some of these will hit huge, and others won't, but we can't miss out because we're just too stuck in the same way we've been doing things forever.
Yeah, that's right. Well, John, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate everyone that had questions. Please give your feedback if you thought this was good, would be different. I think we got some good nuggets for our in-person. Greg and Maury, anything you guys want to add before Evan closes us out?
I just want to add my thanks, just as you just stated, Ashley. Thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in 2025.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone for attending. And yes, I look forward to seeing you all in New York.
Great.
Great. Just to close this out, as Ashley said, there's going to be a feedback survey in the coming days about the event. Please let us know your thoughts about the event. If you like the virtual format, this was one of the first times that we've done a virtual event for the Finance Network. It helps us get information out to the network more quickly. And again, we will have that follow-up in person as well. If you do have suggestions for future events or topics, please let us know as part of that feedback survey as well. Thank you again to John for such a robust conversation, Ashley, Greg, and Maury for your leadership on the Finance Network. And again, just want to have a shout out for our upcoming New York holiday party on December 18th at Brooklyn Winery from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And that registration link will be available again in the chat. You can also view all of our alumni events across the country on our alumni events website, which we will share as well in our follow-up messaging with the survey too. We look forward to seeing you at all of our upcoming alumni events and our next Finance Network events as well. Thank you again for coming, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Everyone on the 18th.